you can't completely separate money from ethics or money from privacy and money from just all these other topics that are relevant. Um, and so part of the discussion, part of what can in some countries slow Bitcoin down is basically people begin to view it unethical for one reason or another. They listen to Jamie Dimon or similar types of people and say, okay, that's all for money launderers and things like that. So I think it's important to kind of counter that.
Someone showed me the Bitcoin blockchain in action at tradeblock.com in 2016, and I'm like, what? Oh my God, this is a thing of beauty. This is absolutely beautiful. You mean you can transfer value over time and space? No intermediary. There's only 21 million of these things, and you can see it in action, and you can track your blockchain transaction. And I was like, this is the solution to the fiat ponzi that I've been looking for 30 years.
Broken Money, even though it's a book about money and about monetary history, past, present, and then future, and kind of informing people all about different types of money, there's a whole final part about privacy and about human rights and that intersection between technology and human rights. And so there's a reasonable question: why is that in a money book? Even like a handful of reviews are kind of like, oh, I loved like most of it, but why is there like this weird section in there? But I think people that follow my work would know why it's in there. That basically you can't completely separate money from ethics or money from privacy and money from just all these other topics that are relevant. Um, and so part of the discussion, part of what can in some countries slow Bitcoin down is basically people begin to view it unethical for one reason or another. They listen to Jamie Dimon or similar types of people and say, okay, that's all for money launderers and things like that. So I think it's important to kind of counter that and to say, okay, well, wait a second. I mean, why is privacy in and of itself bad? Why is being able to self custody and then send money quickly bad? Why do we have to go through Jamie Dimon's centralized surveilled ledger if you want to send money or hold money, right? It's and so that component I think is really important. And what FinCEN's trying to do here is they're doing their best to try to slow down privacy technologies, make it burdensome for any sort of Bitcoin broker, Bitcoin exchange, to interact with any sort of even non-custodial privacy tools or people that have recently used them. And so it's trying to add friction for people that are trying to be relatively private with their money. And it's not even just privacy from the government; it's privacy from corporations. If I pull my money out of an exchange and I spend it on different merchants, I don't necessarily want that exchange to see all the things I'm spending it on, or you know, it's privacy. It's my money, right? And so um, I think that as this moves forward, I think that's privacy is going to be one of the biggest battles, right? It's already the case that that's one of the things that people actually go to prison for, right? Operating a mixer, right? Things like that. So, you know, privacy is already kind of the biggest kind of highest stakes battleground, right? So I think a lot of countries are coming around to say, okay, well, you can hold Bitcoin in a ETF, you can hold Bitcoin in a registered, big like honeypot silo that we have surveillance and control over. But what countries don't really like is self-custodial Bitcoin, private Bitcoin, and things like that. Um, and so I think that's going to be an ongoing thing that's not going to be resolved anytime soon, and there's occasional flare-ups. And right now, what we're seeing is a pretty significant attack by FinCEN. And so I think it makes sense to be aware of it, be informed about it, and do your best to push back against it because it's going to be a long war, in my opinion. And I mean that in the hopefully in the peaceful sense. Basically, that one side can be aggressive, and the other side, we have memes, right? We can win the war through narrative. We can win them more, and especially in countries like the United States that still have a pretty good rule of law, right? I mean, we saw, for example, the SEC in their attempts to block Bitcoin ETFs got absolutely smacked down by an appeals court. Their arguments were said to be capricious and arbitrary, um, and that kind of thing happens all the time. I mean, back in the 1990s, when Phil Zimmerman, released open source encryption, the United States government went after him. So he published it in a book and said, "Well, it's the First Amendment now. So kind of come at me, bros." And they lost in the United States. rather through the humor route, the satire route, the court jester route, where you're basically informing people or pushing back on things in funny ways and therefore helping change their minds. Or two, you're taking the more rigorous approach and saying, okay, well, here's all this case law, here's all this precedent, here's the Constitution, here's this, other set of laws that makes this clear overreach, and that people do have these rights. And so, but I do think this is going to be kind of a multi-front, long term.
By the way, you don't escape the debt spiral. It's the only thing that solves the debt spiral is printing more money, which means fiat money is 100% certain to debase, which means you need to protect yourself with hard assets. And Bitcoin is just quite simply the best hard asset that man has ever created. We can talk about that, but what I really want to, bring up is I always bring credit into an analysis of any product that I study. And I think of Bitcoin as the anti-fiat. In other words, if you own Bitcoin, you're actually short the credit, or you're short the sovereign debt of the fiat issuing or the fiat nations around the world. So think of Bitcoin as being a credit insurance on the sovereign debt of the world. And you can actually calculate an intrinsic value of Bitcoin using credit default swaps on sovereign debt. And I wrote a paper. It's what sort of got me into the Bitcoin community, endeared me to the Bitcoin community, that I can value using credit default swaps an intrinsic value of Bitcoin based on open market insurance rates on sovereign debt. And it's only a model. It's a model that I'm very comfortable with. But like everything, some people can agree with it. Some people can use it as a, one input into their valuation metric for Bitcoin. But I'm proud of that model. It's some people are finally coming around to the understanding that Bitcoin is an insurance product